Chapter 14. The Questions. Antony's POV. Hanyu, I have a question. Yes, my lord? Are you in fact capable of holding still? If I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not sure, my lord. Sorry. Well, Antony had asked, and he could hardly fault the boy for answering him truthfully. Hanyu had indeed slept through the attendant's knock on the door that morning, but the man had been delivering the news that it was raining and the offerings would not be going up to the deck that day. As such, Antony had let the boy sleep as long as he wanted, and resumed painting as soon as he was awake, washed, and fed. It had been rather flattering to see that Hanyu wasn't disappointed to miss his outing, and instead complied happily with Antony's plans for the day. Well, he was trying to comply anyway. Never mind, Antony sighed. I don't care about the rest, but just try and keep your face still, will you? Try to look natural. Hanyu clamped his mouth shut and widened his eyes froggishly. Antony winced. For goodness sakes, boy, is that how you think your face naturally looks? Isn't it? Fuck no. No wonder you were surprised I'd want to paint you. Antony rolled his eyes. Listen, just relax, all right? Sorry, my lord. How's this? Hanyu slackened his jaw and let his eyes go half-lidded, but only succeeded in making himself look vacant, which was not much better. He gave the impression that he'd start drooling in a moment. Antony sighed again. What if you were to talk as I go? I'll have to guess at the mouth, but it should keep the rest of your face relaxed. All right, my lord. The boy then proceeded to stare at Antony, the picture of helpless, silent dismay. So, talk, Antony prodded. I'm sorry, my lord, the boy wailed. I can't think of anything to say. How is that possible? Antony marveled. You even talk in your sleep. Hanyu cocked his head curiously. I do? Intermittently, Antony snapped. All right then, I'll ask you a question and see if we can get those words flowing. It was hard to think of something within such broad parameters. The boy had a point, which irritated Antony. What classes did you like at the temple? He asked at last. Dancing, singing, and recitation were my favorites, my lord, the boy said, and that appeared to be the end of it. Antony needed better questions. What interested the boy? They'd been living together for over a week, and he had no idea, and that made some long, silent corner of his mind feel a little embarrassed. Wait, he did know one thing. Hanyu had been excited to see the rest of his cadre on the upper deck. Who are your best friends? That was the right question. The boy's face lit like a sky at sunrise, or at least like the way Antony remembered them. My best friend is Asao. He was the finest of our whole cadre, the one the temple put forward for you, my lord, but he still spent most of his time with me. He belongs to Lord Marcus now. Oh. Antony remembered with a twinge his flippant thoughts about Marcus taking his poor temper out on his attendant. He hadn't realized that the boy was Hanyu's closest friend. He thought back to the offering ceremony, trying to remember the temple's choice, but all he could conjure up was a vague impression of a pretty, slender boy with humbly downcast eyes. He'd never be able to pick him out of a group. Hanyu continued talking, warming to his topic, and Antony gratefully abandoned his efforts to remember the boy who'd been presented to him. He's so proper you just have to tease him a little, and he'll be indignant and scold you, but he'll laugh first, Hanyu said, his face bright and animated. He hates being second in any of our classes. One time he cried because he made a single mistake in a 10-minute harp song. He says I'm blasphemizing all the time. Whenever I hear myself thinking blasphemous thoughts, it's his voice I hear in his head scolding me. Blasphemous thoughts? Antony looked up from his painting, amused. Such as? Oh, Hanyu colored. Nothing too bad, my lord, I promise. Though I suppose they're all bad, aren't they? Come now, I'm not going to punish you for your thoughts. The boy's face would not be still. He was impossible to paint. Tell me some of them. I'm curious to find out what counts as blasphemy. Your friend can educate us both. Hanyu looked nervous. Another change of expression. Sometimes I think of you as my god, my lord. Please don't be angry. I'm not. Quite the opposite. Against his will, Antony was charmed. Is that all it takes? Goodness, blasphemy is easy to fall into. You don't find it disrespectful? Hanyu asked timidly. Not at all, Antony assured him. Quite reasonable, really. You're my offering out of all the offerings. Why shouldn't I be your god out of all the gods? Hanyu smiled and blushed. Thank you, my lord. Antony realized he'd gotten caught up in all the conversation and forgotten all about painting the damn boy. He returned his gaze to the canvas. "Tell me more about a sow, was it?" "Yes, my lord, that's right. Well, he'd hate me for saying this, but he loves fried yams, but they give him pimples, so he's always saying he's given them up forever, but then he cracks and eats a whole plateful. He's scared of ladybugs because one bit him once. He always used to beg Father Shue to lighten my punishments, even if he knew I deserved them. I usually did. If you'll pardon my saying so, my lord, I really don't know why you didn't choose him. He's perfect. I'm sure you've repented of your choice by now, though, so I shouldn't rub it in." "Don't be stupid," Antony snapped, surprised by the irritation that flooded him at the words. "Of course I don't want another offering." "Sorry, my lord." The boy looked down. "That's another of my blasphemous thoughts, I guess. I keep thinking you made a mistake picking me." He looked up again and grinned. "But it was a good mistake for me, so I'm not complaining." "Well, I'm not complaining either," except to himself, and Marcus and Theodora, and his sister. He wasn't complaining now, though. "So that's not much of a mistake, is it?" Hanyu beamed, and Antony gave up and simply decided to paint the smile. "Now, are you friends with Theodora's boy?" Antony fished for the name. "Kenta?" "Of course," Hanyu enthused. "Kenta's wonderful. He's got the most beautiful singing voice. He made Father Shue cry one day when he sang The Murdered Bridegroom, and he's awfully kind. He used to walk around after it rained and move all the worms and slugs from the paths so they wouldn't get stepped on. The priest would scold him for getting dirt and slime all over his hands, but he never stopped." No wonder Theodora hadn't wanted to give him up, if he sang as well as all that. And gentleness was a rare trait among their own people anymore. It must have seemed very novel to her. Her decision made more sense to Antony, knowing these things about her boy. "What about your other friends?" Antony asked. "There's Jen. He's very warm and kindly, and he laughs at everything. I think he pretends to be stupider than he is, because that way people don't take offense when he asks blunt questions that no one else can get up the courage to ask themselves. He was the first to find where the dirty books were kept in the library, and he—" The monologue went on and on. Apparently, Hanyu was friends with everyone he'd met in his life. No great surprise there, Antony supposed. Ordinarily, Antony would have been finished painting before the boy was a third of the way done describing his whole damn cadre, but there were two things that dragged the process out. In the first place, he kept getting caught up in Hanyu's descriptions. The quiet, obedient boys he'd barely spared a glance at the ceremony seemed so vivid and interesting in their friends' descriptions. He'd had the thought several times that if any of his vampires had ever showed such detailed attention to and knowledge of the people around them, he would have made them one of his lieutenants. Still, Hanyu would have been a shit spy master. His observations were all complimentary, and his anecdotes revealed only the barest hints of any slight flaw or fallables in their protagonists. The boy was either hopelessly naive, or else very careful not to speak badly of his friends. Considering his obvious admiration for Antony, it was probably the former. The other holdup in Antony's artistic process was a fundamental problem with his subject. The boy's face wouldn't stop. His mouth was moving, of course, but also his eyebrows went up and down, his cheeks puffed out, his chin firmed or dimpled, his eyes narrowed and widened, and he even waved his hands around, completely ignoring the fact that he was supposed to be posing. Antony made a dozen efforts, through descriptions of the virtues of a dozen boys, to choose a single expression and get it down before it could change. He would interrupt the stream of words and tell Hanyu, "Stop, hold still, just like that," and the boy would try, but in freezing the expression, he ruined it every time. He would widen his eyes too far or freeze with his mouth half open, or just settle, losing the animation that Antony hoped to capture. Finally, he gave up. He slapped down his best approximation of Hanyu's grin as the boy prattled on. "Time when the high priest was coming to speak with Father Shue about our lessons, Daiji figured out which room would be directly above their meeting, and we all put cups against the floor to try and eavesdrop on them. The floor was too thick for us to hear anything, but it worked for listening through doors, if the guards didn't catch you, and he can do all kinds of sums in his head, without a paper or anything. "I'm done," Antony interrupted. "Do you want to come look?" "Oh!" The boy tried to scramble up, but caught his hand on his robe and jerked hard against his own weight, resulting in a quick stop and an inelegant flop back onto the couch. "Easy, boy," Antony chided. "It's a painting. It's not going to run away if you don't get here fast enough." "Sorry, my lord." Hanyu scrambled forward, moved around the easel and stool, then leaned over Antony's shoulder, so close the vampire could feel the warmth. When he saw the painting, the boy gasped and began bouncing a little on his toes. For his part, Antony was scowling at his handiwork. It wasn't right at all. In the painting, Hanyu looked flat and elegant and boring, like some king's consort in an official portrait. Antony hated it. "I love it," the boy enthused. "I can't believe you painted an entire picture of me, my lord, and you made me look perfect, beautiful. Thank you so much." Antony decided against saying it looked nothing like Hanyu, as he'd been about to do. "I'd like to try again," he said instead, "maybe a different pose, but for now I'll leave this one to dry and hope the sea stays smooth." "It's so wonderful," Hanyu said dreamily. "And you want another?" "Of course." Antony glared at the canvas. "This one doesn't do you justice." He regretted the words when the boy turned enormous brown eyes on him, brimming over with joyful tears. He was stuck with a ridiculous urge to throw his hands up to protect himself from the full, beaming force of Hanyu's smile. Surely there was enough sunshine in that expression to blister the skin. "You're far too kind, Lord Antony," the boy said softly. "Please, isn't there anything I can do to thank you for your generous attentions?" "Danger!" The boy's body was pressed against him all at once, soft and warm and pliant, and his tongue was darting out to wet his lips. Also, he was speaking more formally and using bigger words than usual, which Antony realized must be one of his tells for attempted seduction. "You can put the painting somewhere safe to dry," Antony said briskly. "Once you've done that, you can do as you like. I'm going out." Crestfallen, the boy nonetheless bowed his acceptance. "Of course, my lord, thank you." Once the door had shut safely behind him, Antony let out a breath and tried to decide where to go. His first instinct was to take the coordinates his sister had sent him to Theodora and tell her to set their course for that location, but the scrap of paper he'd written them on was still in the room, and he didn't want to go back in there. Another thought occurred, though he faced this one more reluctantly. Still, it had to be done sooner or later, and sooner would probably be better. Antony turned and walked to Marcus's chambers. Hanyu's POV. Hanyu had to admit to himself that he'd been sulking for most of the day. He hadn't necessarily expected Lord Antony to accept his barely veiled offer, but he certainly hadn't expected the god to launch himself out of the door so quickly Hanyu thought he could have stepped into the hole his master left in the air. Hanyu knew it was his own fault. He'd been told that Lord Antony didn't bed humans, but still, when he'd seen how lovely his master made him in the painting, he hadn't been able to help wondering whether he'd changed his mind. Hanyu kept drifting back to look at the painting, even at the height of his snit. It astounded him that Lord Antony had spent so much time creating a likeness of him, and even more that that likeness was so flattering. In the painting, Hanyu looked cool and elegant, poised and lovely, like a king's consort, like a sow. Was this really how Lord Antony saw him? A graceful, beautiful young man who looked as if he could hold an intelligent conversation or make a witty joke or charm his way into a god's bed? Apparently not. Apparently the thought of bedding him was so repulsive that it caused thousand-year-old deities to flee in terror. Hanyu was sulkily cleaning the jewelry the temple sent with him when he heard a tentative rap on the door. When he opened it, he found himself looking at a broad-shouldered man with a face so beautiful he almost forgot to breathe. "Hello," he squeaked. The man looked at him with an unreadable expression, then shifted his gaze over Hanyu's shoulder to the sitting room. "May I come in?" he asked. "I've brought your dinner and your clean laundry." "Oh, of course!" Hanyu turned to let him in and almost walked right into the doorframe. The man entered, bearing a cloth bag and a covered tray. He pushed the bag into Hanyu's fumbling hands, set the tray on the table, then turned a little, taking in the room. "Lord Antony isn't here?" he asked, though it sounded less like a question than a statement. "No, he isn't." Hanyu stashed the bag next to his chest, then went back to staring at the gorgeous stranger. "What's your name?" "Eji," the man said, and Hanyu's stomach plummeted at the name of his master's previous offering. This man was stunning. He had the high cheekbones and square jaw of a hero from a story, paired with some of the brightest, darkest eyes Hanyu had ever seen. His lips were full and sensual, and the muscles of his chest and shoulders were so clearly defined under his fine silk shirt that they could have been sculpture rather than flesh. If beauty like this couldn't tempt Lord Antony, Hanyu didn't have a prayer. "You were," he stammered, and Eji looked at him coldly. Yes, I was Lord Antony's personal attendant before you, he said. I thought you served Lord Felix now, Hanyu blurted. The beautiful man's face softened a little. Yes, I do, but I wanted a work detail as well. My master doesn't mind. That's good, Hanyu managed. It is good, said Edgy. Lord Felix has been very good to me. I'm glad. There was no way that he was as wonderful as Lord Antony, but Hanyu didn't want to rub his predecessor's nose in what he'd lost. I'll be going, Edgy said at last. Good luck to you. Wait! Hanyu cried. He flushed and stammered and cursed himself for asking, but he couldn't help himself, and the beautiful man waited impassively until he managed to spit out his question. Is it true that Lord Antony never grants humans the honor of his bed? For a moment, Edgy looked almost pitying. It's true. I know you had grand ideas when he chose you. It was the same for me, but you need to let go of those. In 6 years, he barely said more to me than raise your head or play some music, would you? And he never once touched me except to feed. That couldn't be right. Lord Antony talked with Hanyu all the time, and he seemed to enjoy hearing about everyone in the cadre. Edgy was probably just bitter that he'd never earned the chance to pleasure the god, and that he'd been replaced. Hanyu decided he wouldn't be like that. He wouldn't run out of chances to please his master and work towards being permitted in his bed until Lord Antony sent him away, and that was 6 years from now. There was no point losing hope and sabotaging himself now, no matter how gorgeous his predecessor was. Thank you for your advice, he said with a polite bow, and Edgy nodded and left. Hanyu sat down at the table and wolfed down his dinner, then he went to the bag to put away his clean laundry. To his astonishment, he found the filmy cloth of gold robe he thought ruined gleaming softly at the top of the pile. They'd gotten the stains out after all. It felt like a good omen, and though Hanyu decided against changing into the robe just then, he skipped off to his closet to apply some makeup. Lord Antony could be back any time, and anything could happen.